So I'm really pleased to be speaking with Andrew Fadden from Inara Bio. Their experience over the last 18 months has been really interesting in terms of an example of a company that's seen real success in their business development work. So Andrew, thank you for joining me. Could I ask you just to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role at Inara Bio?
Hi, Sarah. Yeah, and thanks for inviting me to take part in this conversation. So yeah, I'm Andrew Fadden. I'm the head of corporate development at Inara Bio. I originally started out as a biochemist. So I read biochemistry at Oxford, did my PhD with Cancer Research UK at the London Research Institute. So the group that I was with is now at the Crick Institute in London. And then from there, I moved into the pharmaceutical industry, first with GSK in global regulatory affairs, stayed in regulatory affairs with UCB in Brussels, and also did some time with Vertex Pharmaceuticals in London. But my role immediately prior to Inara Bio was with Immunocourse, another UK-based biotech with an interest in cancer immunotherapy. So I was a program leader there for one of their TCR-based bispecific programs. And that I was part of the team that partnered that program with Genentech, the program we were working on there. And I think that, and also some out-licensed work that we did at Vertex on the oncology pipeline, led me on a path towards business development and corporate development. And I've been in my current role with Inara Bio for around 20 months or so now. And so my role encompasses business development, all aspects of that, as well as intellectual property, legal and contracts, alliance management, and external comms. It's quite a broad remit I have at Inara. Yeah, perhaps a little bit about the company.
That would be great.
Yeah, so we were founded as Urvax actually in 2016. So Urvax was the original name of the company, and that reflected an interest in the time in human endogenous retroviral related sequences in the genome. So that gave the part of the name. And then we were interested in developing therapeutic cancer vaccines on the back of those sequences. So that was the Vax part. Since then, we've really broadened our interest. We're still interested in novel sequences in the human genome that are in regions of the genome previously considered to be non-coded, or the dark matter of the genome. And we've found that antigens can be expressed on the surface of cancer cells that are derived from these regions of the genome. We call them the dark antigens. So yeah, occasionally we see that kind of referenced on our website. We've got team fleeces with this written on as well as a bit of the tagline for us. But another element of our research revolves around some really interesting technology we licensed from Cardiff University at the beginning of 2020. In particular, we have a program there which has become our lead program, which is centered around a particular T-cell receptor that recognizes cancer-specific ligands presented by a receptor called MR1. And this technology has huge potential to treat a broad range of cancer patients. And we're developing the T-cell receptor into an autologous TCR-T cell therapy product. Yeah, there are around 35 of us now. We have labs at the Bell House building, one of the new buildings at Oxford Science Park. Yeah, and we're well-financed, 3 specialist life science investors. So SV Health Investors in London have been with us since the start. And we brought on RA Capital and Samsara Bio Capital in the middle of last year.
Great. So you told us that you'd been with Inara Bio for about 20 months. So as we're talking in the spring of 2021, that means, looking back, you didn't have a huge amount of time in your role and in terms of developing relationships with potential partners, sort of strategic alliances, etc., before the world changed with COVID-19. But maybe looking back to that early stage, can you describe a bit what business development was like, the kind of things that you were doing to drive forward the business development agenda?
Yeah, so obviously part of it was going to conferences. So we'd had some business development meetings at the SITC Cancer Immunotherapy conference in November 2019. So that's the Society for Immunotherapy in Cancer. And yeah, I think preparing to go to more conferences, both those that specifically related to cancer and cancer research, but also those perhaps a bit more for the business development community like bio. Those sorts of conferences were definitely on the schedule of things that we were going to be focused on. And of course, the pandemic hit, and we had to take a very different tact on what we were doing. So yeah, I'm happy to kind of explore that a bit more in the coming session.
Yeah. So perhaps you could describe, how things changed when March 2020 hit.
Yeah. So I think we had to take stock, think more about kind of our business development objectives for the year and how we'd be able to achieve them in a lockdown situation. I think a big objective for us last year, as one of our corporate objectives, was to secure a pharma collaboration on our dark antigens research. So yeah, what we did was we looked to see who we'd spoke to at meetings earlier in 2020. So our CEO, Kevin Pajasic, had attended the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference at the beginning of the year. That's also kind of a big conference for starting BD discussions, and mapped out who he'd spoken to and who he hadn't been able to speak to. And then it was looking at the array of different companies that might be able to engage in this sort of collaborations with us, understanding if they had interest in cancer immunotherapy, particular therapeutic vaccines or cell therapies, and then assessing how we could get meaningful conversations with senior figures in business development for those companies, and ideally in senior positions in the scientific research side of the companies as well. And so when we mapped out the range of companies that we would like to have a conversation with, it was then about how do we engage, how do we get the contacts. Some of that, to be honest, was kind of research on LinkedIn, and then some cold calling or cold emails, if I can put it that way, trying to tell our story concisely in an email, and then see if we can get a Zoom call scheduled. I'd say that was maybe a third to half of the cases were like that, and then the other 2/3 to 1/2 was recommendations. So Kevin, other members of the management team have been in the pharma industry and biotech industry for a long time, so have contacts in a number of the pharma companies. And our board of directors was great in that respect as well. Specialist life science VCs tend to be connected, have good connections into the pharma world. So yeah, by that mixture, we were able to get all the meetings we wanted to be able to introduce the company and our science to pharma companies.
Okay, so that's really interesting. So you're painting a picture here of sweating your existing network very, very hard, and really drawing on connections that that everybody associated with the company had, to try and reach into those targets that you'd identified.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was a key part of the approach. And I think where we'd had some interest early in 2020 at things like JP Morgan, I think making sure we build on that, we're able to kind of keep that discussion ongoing using the virtual tools like Zoom, BlueJeans, Microsoft Teams. As it happened, Boehringer Ingelheim, who we ended up doing a nice deal with at the end of last year, they were a company that we had a good discussion with at JP Morgan, so we already had the ball rolling a little bit on that one, which was nice. It always helped.
Great. I'm going to come back to Boehringer Ingelheim and the relationship that you have developed with them, but I was also really interested to hear that you used tools like LinkedIn to try and find people that you could effectively cold call. Mm. So are there any key lessons that you learned from that? Are there particular approaches that seem to work well, or ones that didn't? If you were now making recommendations to a young company that was starting out, what are the things that you think that they ought to be doing with regard to that, almost starting from scratch and building relationships in this virtual way?
Yeah, I think it's the judicious about the use of LinkedIn. I think, a lot of people get a lot of LinkedIn messages every day. So I think we all experience that. So I think maybe in some of the cases, it wasn't going to kind of the senior vice president of business development. It was perhaps looking to see kind of who might be the director, associate director involved in BD in the particular therapeutic area we're interested in, to get that initial engagement. I think having a very good sense of the story you're trying to tell, both in a punchy teaser email, also your non-confidential deck, making sure that kind of the science is there, it's clear, the strength of the team is clear, and it's easy for the BD exec to get engagement with what you're doing and want to find out a little bit more. So I think it's those basics, but I think you kind of hit the nail on the head as well. You sweat your network, speak to your board members, try and get a few introductions. All of that always helps. I mean, there are other members of the SV Health Investor family. So one of their other portfolio companies, Catamaran, and I got introduced to the BD director there. He was able to make some introductions for me as well. So it's kind of using your network via multiple steps to get introductions as much as you can, I would say.
Well, that's really great to hear that of other companies helping, colleagues in different organisations to make those contacts. So you've already mentioned that you were able to secure this fantastic partnership with Boehringer Ingelheim, which I think I'm correct in saying was took most of 2020 actually to deliver, from those very early stage discussions through to signing the deal, as it were. Mm. So perhaps you could tell us what that was like. How did you take that from those very early stages through, given that presumably you were never in the room with the people that you were engaging with?
No, I've still not been in the room with the Boehringer Ingelheim team, particularly their kind of the point man they had on the deal was a guy in the US, Scott Dwyer, who's a great guy, but I've only ever met him over Zoom and Microsoft Teams. Yeah, I mean, as you say, it really built over the whole of 2020. I think we had a great initial discussion with them. Kevin, our CEO, did at JP Morgan. His feedback to me immediately after speaking with them was that they were very clear on what they were looking for. They were looking for novel cancer-specific antigens to build their oncolytic virus and therapeutic cancer vaccine platforms. And I think they've done a number of deals in that field, putting that platform together. And they had some familiarity, to a pretty decent level in terms of what our research was, and had seen our work at SITC in October, November 2019. And so kind of when the pandemic hit, we picked up the scientific discussion with the Boehringer Ingelheim team, went under CDA, presented more of our data and research. And I think there was a clear understanding that they were interested, and we thought they were asking all the right questions in terms of gaps in the research and things that we were trying to fill in our understanding of with respect to dark antigen biology. And then I had a couple of good discussions with Scott, their BD lead, on deal structure and collaboration structure, first of all. And I think what was great about Boehringer was that they were very open-minded. So I think as a young biotech looking to strike these sorts of deals and collaborations, what you want to do is obviously do so in a way that generates value and generates some funding for your company as well in many cases, but also retains the ability to grow as a company. And I think one of the great parts of the collaboration with Boehringer is that we've been able to structure things so that we retain the rights to exploit any discovered dark antigens and cell therapies, which is the main therapeutic modality that NARA is focused on. So this really was a win-win. It allows Boehringer to work for us to discover these new antigens, feed them into the modalities and platforms that they're trying to build and really interested in, but also it gives us something to build on and grow as a company. So I think once we got to that point in the summer, it was clear that there was an attractive deal for us to do. We then worked through kind of the term sheet, the financials, handling the intellectual property. So I think by the time we got to August time, we were set to move in to negotiate the definitive agreement. I think maybe one reflection was, it's important to be patient in these things. I mean, they had other deals ongoing. They were good at communicating with us that was the case. So, things moved a bit slower. So having that patience, knowing that things are, one, tougher because things are virtual, but also kind of, life was difficult for everyone, I guess, last summer.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of an understanding of that. And then, going back to kind of the definitive agreement, I'd say that was one part of the process that maybe took a bit longer than you'd expect. Ordinarily, we couldn't get on a plane and just go and sit in the room with them for 3 or 4 days and just crunch through the agreement. We had to do that over Zoom, many different iterations. That's probably not quite as efficient, but we got to a place where just after Thanksgiving, we were able to sign the deal, and then we're very pleased to announce it there in early January.
Great. So what I'm taking from this is patience, the fact that it did take longer, that you had to adjust the way that you worked in terms of the way that you were engaging with your opposite numbers on their side, and the importance of really good communication. So the fact that they managed your expectations by making it clear that they've got other deals that were in the pipeline that were perhaps a bit farther advanced than yours. So you just needed to wait your turn until they could turn their focus. And just, I guess, one of the things that I'm really interested in is, in terms of business development and engaging with people, it is so much about building a rapport and developing a relationship. And whilst we've all got used to working in this way through screens, it is, of course, much, much harder because you haven't got those same visual clues and cues that you might have. So was there anything that you took away that you thought, that's something I need to make sure that I carry forward into the way that I do things in terms of creating rapport and building relationship?
Yeah, I think the main thing that I think helped is to bring a bit of levity to the proceedings sometimes. I think it's much easier to kind of build a bit of rapport, sense when, people are in a good mood, people are kind of open to a bit of lightheartedness. I think often on the Zoom calls, it's difficult to gauge that. But I think it's important because obviously discussions around these type of license and collaboration agreements with the type of financial terms that sometimes fall within the agreements, it's very easy to get very serious, and it quickly becomes not much fun. So I think what I've learned is if there's the ability to detach some of that, sometimes speak to someone just about how the pandemic's going for them, how it's going for their family, what lockdown is like in their area. So Scott and kind of the other transaction lead at Boehringer, a guy called Eunice, they're in Connecticut, understanding what their situation was, how much they could get out and about, what the homeschooling was for their kids. I think bringing that to the discussion starts to build a bit of rapport. It's easy to be lighthearted in those sorts of situations as well. And then I think when you bring it back to kind of some of the heavy duty negotiation and agreements, you've got that little bit of good feeling in reserve sometimes that certainly is always helpful. So yeah, I think that's just it, making sure that you don't forget the basics of us as kind of people outside of work, right? That stuff is second nature in person, but making sure it happens on Zoom and virtually as well is important.
Yeah, no, I think that's really incredibly helpful insight, actually, because it is something, as I said, we're all having to learn to do still, I think, and to find ways of doing that, and recognizing that that's an important part of the process is incredibly helpful. So fantastic. It sounds as if it's been a fantastically successful year for you, because you did sign that deal with Boehringer Ingelheim, which you've described as being very, very positive for Inara Bio, and mutually advantageous to both sides, which is fantastic. Looking forward, as we're talking, we're now in the spring of 2021, and we've got the prospect of the UK certainly opening up slowly and steadily over the coming months. So looking forward, what do you think business development is going to look like for you? Do you think it will be a return to how it was in 2019? Or do you think that some of the things that have been brought into play in the last year will continue to be part of the practice moving forward?
Yeah, my suspicion is it will be a bit of a mixture going forward, right? I think we've seen, not just with respect to business development, maybe just in terms of operations in general within Inara, that we can still move the research forward. You know, with most of us working at home, an awful lot of us working at home, obviously the guys in the lab, they need to be in the lab, but for those of us in corporate or G&A functions being at home so much, we've still been able to meet our corporate objectives and move forward as a company. So I think there's going to be more openness, I think, to working remotely and virtually going forward. So I think that's almost certain. I think that will translate across to business development. I think we'll perhaps do a little bit more work how we've done it over the last year in terms of kind of reaching out to companies and trying to get engagement on an ad hoc basis rather than waiting for kind of the big networking conferences or cancer research conferences to come around. That said, I think once everyone's confident the pandemic is under control, I think we'll go back and start to present our science at those conferences and start to network and have BD discussions around those presentations. I think that's always helpful and healthy. And despite I think the success of virtual interactions, there's nothing quite like, I think, meeting people in person. And if nothing else, I'd love to have a beer with the Boehringer Ingelheim. Would you? Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm sure you're all wanting to celebrate in a more active way than you've been able to do, engaging virtually. One final thing that I meant to ask you, and I think I'd be just really interested as we wrap up this conversation to kind of hear your experience. You talked about the importance of some of the conferences that you've participated in terms of getting Inara Bio's story and science out there, and your hope that you'll return to some of those moving forward. Did you participate in any online conferences over the course of the last year? And if so, did they work for you? Did you find any that worked reasonably well, or what was the experience?
Yeah, so I took part in the BioTrinity conference last year virtually, and I think it worked well. Kind of the system they had for setting up the networking appointments was great, seamless, really. And the introductory discussions we had were very useful, particularly in terms of identifying potential suppliers for to enable the research, folks like contract research organizations, for us to start to think about how we want to move particular assets into the clinic. I'd say in terms of kind of meaningful discussions with pharma partners on the type of collaboration that we struck with Boehringer Ingelheim, I don't think it's so valuable for that. I think that there's no reason it couldn't be with the right sort of engagement from companies of all sizes. I think in terms of kind of scientific research, I think we were at a point last year actually where we were building a lot of capabilities internally, starting to pressure test and validate the science that we'd licensed in from Cardiff. So as fate would have it, I don't think would have done an awful lot on the scientific presentation side at the big cancer conferences like ACR and SITC last year. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see what happens in the months ahead, because certainly over the last 6 months or so, we've generated a lot of interesting data. And so, yeah, we just need to integrate that with kind of our corporate story and news flow building up to raising more money for the company.
Great. Well, that sounds like a good point to finish. Looking forward in a very positive way, both in terms of the business opportunities, but also the continuation of the science. Andrew, thank you very much for sharing your experiences and your insights with us. I really appreciate your contribution.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for the invitation, Sarah.